So my name is Małgorzata Wierzba, and together with Dominika Zaremba, we will present the preliminary findings from a qualitative study that in principle mirrored what was done by Michalina Marczak in Norway to investigate climate change concern in Poland. From the previous talk, we've learned that emotions that people experience toward climate change are predominantly negative feelings feelings such as fear, guilt, or anger. But on the other hand, some people report feeling positive emotions as well. And in this presentation, we want to focus explicitly on this recurring themes of positive emotions reported by our interviewees. Why is it important to study positive emotions in the context of climate change, a phenomenon that is the greatest threat and likely most fundamental challenge of our time? It is argued whether positive or negative emotions are better in encouraging behavior that mitigates climate change. While negative emotions are obviously more powerful in driving our attention to the problem of climate change, it is positive emotions that are more likely to induce more sustained change in behavior. For instance, people may behave pro-environmentally because the act of doing so elicits positive emotional experience, which in turn reinforces the behavior. Importantly, not only emotions that people experience at a given moment, but also emotions people anticipate to experience are important drivers of action.
So how do we know and how do we measure what people think about climate change? So far, as you know, we don't have so many established questionnaires that measure climate emotions in terms of numbers. We also don't have any established theories that would explain or classify specifically climate emotions. So this is why we also decided to explore the realm of climate emotions using methods of qualitative research, individual in-depth interviews. So people could speak freely about their emotions and thoughts of climate change and take the conversation in the new directions. And because of this loose conversational format, we could establish the range of emotions, including positive and negative emotions related to climate change. But two important remarks need to be made here. What climate change are we talking about? So we didn't constrain the term climate change, and instead relied on what the term meant to people. Thus, rather than framing climate change as purely physical phenomenon, we allowed people to share their thoughts and feelings on what they found relevant in the context of climate change. So we understand climate change as understood by our interviewees. Second remark is the question you might have: are positive emotions a sign of unawareness, obliviousness to the problem, to how big the climate crisis is? And we also explicitly spoke to people concerned about climate change. It means that positive emotions did not stem from insufficient awareness of the problem, nor from the disengagement with the issue. Oftentimes, these positive emotions were experienced as a result of coping with this very painful negative emotions. This is what we've heard in the interviews. Gosia, how many interviews did we conduct?
Yes, so in total, we conducted 40 interviews with people who expressed their strong concern about climate change. And our goal was to speak to people of different backgrounds with different perspectives. And that translated to about 50 hours of audio recordings. And this in turn into a crazy number of pages of transcripts that we got to analyze. And apart from that, many people shared other references with us, such as they pointed us to pictures, movies, and books they read. This kind of rich qualitative data can obviously be analyzed in many ways, but for the purpose of the present talk, we will structure the analysis in this very simplistic way. So every time a person tells us about his or her emotional experience, we will try to consider what triggers the emotion. Is it something that happens to a person, or rather something that the person does? What are the related thoughts, interpretations, or beliefs? What emotion is felt by the person exactly? And finally, how this emotion impacts behavior.
So, for example, a trigger can be that my friend Anne says to me that she already noticed symptoms of climate change. Then I might start thinking, oh, this is happening so fast. We don't have much time. And as this thought comes to my mind, I'm beginning to feel emotions of anxiety. I began to feel nervous, a bit agitated. And what comes after this train of triggers, thoughts, and emotions, my behavior. It triggers me to look up information on the internet on how to act fast and effectively to mitigate climate change.
So respect and admiration was often mentioned in relation to nature. People often perceive themselves as a small, only a small part of the greater whole. They express their connection to, as well as their dependence on the natural world. Another recurring theme was respect expressed towards people who engaged in climate activism. Interviewees spoke about their admiration for people who dedicated their lives and sometimes risked their personal safety in order to fight for the climate. So one of the interviewees said, "It often takes a lot of energy to achieve a small change. I feel compassion towards people who risk breaking the law doing acts of civil disobedience. They really risk a lot and are later mocked for their efforts. They're not treated seriously. Their actions seem to change nothing. On the other hand, the feelings I have are positive, that despite the odds, people are willing to stay engaged. I admire these people."
Okay, another group of emotions energizing feelings of motivation to act, and they are often triggered by either intensive thinking that leads to reappraisals of the beliefs of one efficacy, also triggered by reflection about our loved ones and objects of our care that can also trigger this feeling. Interviewees spoke about their siblings, their children and grandchildren's future that was encouraging them to act despite feelings of hopelessness. They thought about being able to say to them one day, I did everything I could do. I was on the good side when the fate was being decided, right? Once Magdalena Budiszewska, our project collaborator, said something that can neatly summarize the thoughts related to this position. Hope is a moral position, not a risk assessment. So these reinvigorating emotions protected participants from burnout and paralysis and helped them pull through the pessimism, as illustrated in this quote. Know that there are many who did everything they could. And this is what I'm actually guided by, as I am becoming more and more aware that most likely it will not be possible to save this planet. I mean, it sounds pessimistic, but this vision does not take away my will. It does not evoke any feelings in me, any depression. It does not take away the will to act, quite the opposite. A wise man plants a tree a day before the end of the world. It's a paradox, but that's how I'm trying to live now.
People talked about pleasure in the context of their perception of nature. Many people expressed their close relation to the natural world, which they perceived as a source of solace and joy. Satisfaction, on the other hand, was often mentioned when people spoke about their personal actions and the decisions they make in order to live more sustainable lives. The feeling of satisfaction was motivating individuals to stay active, stay mindful about their own impact on the climate. For instance, one interviewee reported, "I think that I'm reassured by the fact that, okay, I may not have a huge impact as an individual, but the decisions I make aren't usually very demanding of me, but I still that at least I'm contributing. Like, I don't know, changing my shopping bag to a bag made from recycled materials for me, let's say, satisfying and calming. Like, I do what I could and it doesn't disturb my whole day. It's a small change to me. The feeling is satisfying enough that it often elevates my mood just a little bit."
Another a sense of community. It is defined as a sense, as a feeling that we are part of a group that shares perspectives and values. And so the triggers were collective climate action, organizing and working with others, for example, other activists, honest and intimate conversations about climate that helped brought about this sense of being understood, supported, strengthened. Contact with others inspired hope that maybe the world or ourselves are not doomed completely. Presence of others, even though they were also experiencing anxiety, grief, was comforting and reassuring. Participants described feelings of peacefulness and warmth, as well as enthusiasm and energy from this sense of community. Feeling sense of community inspired people to collective climate action, reinforced also individual environmental consumer choices, as for example, buying directly from the farmer that we can have intimate relationship with, not just from the supermarket. Or another quote that can summarize this emotion: "Nobody came with me. I went by myself, didn't know these people, and just went on a strike with them, climate strike. I entered this environment for the first time, my frustrated peers, who can express it. And I didn't necessarily know how to do it, and I still rather can't. And I come in and I can scream with them and show the banners, and I feel that I'm among the people who can feel it." So it was such a liberating experience, huh? Yeah, such unlocking, let's say, a little bit like that.
Even though people talked about their strong interest in the topic of climate change, they also reported that being constantly exposed to information in the television, newspapers, social media was overwhelming. However, people often talked about their willingness to stay conscious and informed. They talked about how being aware and concerned about climate change is a matter of personal development and morality. For instance, one interviewee reported, "I think that I regularly engage with the topic of climate change. A moment of reflection about a book or a film. I have arranged my schedule so that I'm immersed in it all the time, that I want to hear about it constantly and cannot disengage. Maybe this kind of engagement is a bit bad, but it's good as well, because I remember myself from before when I was mostly wasting time."
Okay, so there were many sources of hope and optimism for people concerned about climate change in Poland. The triggers were reading uplifting news, watching other regular people becoming more aware and involved, listening about new emerging technologies, but the most prominent theme was observing the activists and youth involved in climate action. People start to think that maybe the future will not be all gloom, that humans and nature will adapt and recover from the harm already done, and that there is still time to act, or that young people can hear the last call, and in that there is hope. Hope inspired people to support more bold activist actions and legislation aiming at reducing the climate change. They also keep on choosing more environmentally friendly options when consuming. This is illustrated by that quote. When do I feel this optimism? well, when I read about attempts to stop such behavior or decision, or when I see it, probably a week ago, there were these protests of young people in the city, right? This youth climate strike. And I think to myself, damn well, there is a spirit in the nation. There are young people. Maybe they'll finally take the helm in their hands and say, enough, no. At this moment, such optimism appears in me.
And finally, people often reported feeling conflicting emotions. They talked about how their perception of climate change is not a simple black and white picture. For instance, one quote that can illustrate that is, I'd say that I regularly have these moments of reflection about climate change. I like to think, I like to simply engage in reflection. Is engaging in reflection about climate change something positive or the opposite? It has two dimensions, a positive one and a negative one. Like, I can reflect on my morality. Actually, to me, the way we act with regard to climate change is a question of morality. It's my, I don't know, let's say decalogue. It reflects my spirituality, I think. And I don't believe that be too exaggerated to say. And maybe another one to illustrate that. It's become my lifestyle, my jam, as they say, my interest and my hobby. I don't see that as a negative. Instead, I see it as a passion, a way to improve myself. It's difficult to make a clear distinction. I'd say that it's as much a positive as a negative. At first, I would have said that there are significantly more negative emotions, but over time, as my awareness of climate change increased, I think that at present, I feel the same amount of positive and negative emotions. I can't really determine it now.
Okay, so to sum it up a little bit and give you some other accounts of reasons not to give up, sources of these positive emotions, mostly hope, I'd like to also show some other points. So climate activism, the main reason not to give up for our participants, awareness and action by the youth, collective action and awareness of the mutual support that the communities are trying to give in the face of climate crisis to each other is something that brings hope. Some people were also hopeful about science and technology, expressing something called techno-optimism, believing that the advancements in science and new technological inventions will help us deal or stop the climate change. Lots of positive feelings regarding nature and its potential for regeneration. But also we've heard about religious and metaphysical, philosophical beliefs, supporting positive reappraisals of the situation. People had also some lighter thoughts, some hope about political and social shifts that they observe happening all around the world, seeing activists or politicians concerned about climate change becoming more interested. Also, a very specific moment that we did our interviews at, the pandemic, COVID-19 pandemic, showed that people also viewed this situation as a chance to reflect on our civilization, on the way we do things, and start over. So it was also a source of hope. To conclude, we identified a range of positive emotions besides negative emotions. We also know that certain thoughts and interpretations of reality, of situations, help to elicit these positive emotions. Both negative and positive emotions in future should be taken into account by scientists, decision makers, and communicators interested in engaging public towards climate change action. In next phases of the research, we want to check how the emotions help to sustain pro-environmental behavior engagement in the long term, and do climate emotions impact mental health and psychosocial functioning.
And on the final note, we'd like to thank all the team members and collaborators who contributed to this study. Especially would like to thank Maria and Ola, who participated in the data collection process. But most of all, we'd like to thank all the interviewees that spent countless hours sharing their thoughts and feelings with us.